The Orphans of West Virginia, too silent to be innocent, a haunting phrase that would come to define the tragic tale of Caleb and Iris Blackwood. 17-year-old twins discovered in 1978 in the remote hollows of McDowell County. This is not merely a story of isolation. It's a generational chronicle of genetic decline that would shock even the most hardened investigators of the time. Our story begins on October 12, 1978, when local game warden Thomas Winters stumbled upon what appeared to be an abandoned property while tracking illegal hunting activity in the densely wooded mountains. The Blackwood homestead stood isolated in a narrow hollow, cut off from neighboring communities by steep terrain and decades of deliberate seclusion. What struck me first wasn't the dilapidated condition of the place. Winters would later testify in county records, but the unnatural quiet. No radio playing, no voices. It was just this heavy silence that felt wrong somehow. When Winters approached the weathered cabin with its sagging porch and boarded windows, he noticed a thin plume of smoke rising from the chimney. Someone was indeed home. His knocks went unanswered until he announced himself as a state official. The door creaked open just enough to reveal a pair of identical pale blue eyes, unnaturally large in a gaunt face. They didn't speak, not a single word, Winters recounted. Just stared at me with those vacant expressions. I knew something wasn't right. The twins, Caleb and Iris, appeared severely undernourished and displayed distinctive physical characteristics that would later alarm medical professionals: unusually close-set eyes, pronounced overbites, and noticeably hunched postures. More concerning was their complete inability, or perhaps unwillingness, to communicate verbally. State records would later reveal that the Blackwood family had not been registered with any county services for 3 generations. No birth certificates, no school enrollments, no medical records. It was as if they had deliberately erased themselves from official existence since the early 1900s. The investigation that followed would uncover a disturbing family history tracing back to the post-Civil War era, when Jeremiah Blackwood, a former Confederate soldier, established the homestead in 1868. Historical documents show that after losing his wife to tuberculosis, Jeremiah became increasingly paranoid about outsiders, forbidding his children from venturing beyond their property lines. County archives revealed that by the 1920s, concerns had already been raised about the Blackwood family. A traveling physician's notes from 1923 mentioned troubling signs of familial relations after a rare visit to treat a fever outbreak. His records described children with malformations consistent with close genetic parentage, but noted that his suggestions to involve authorities were met with threats of violence. The most compelling evidence came from genealogical research conducted by Dr. Elizabeth Harmon of Marshall University in 1979. Her painstaking work reconstructed the Blackwood family tree, revealing an increasingly narrow genetic line spanning 5 generations. What we see in the Blackwood lineage is a textbook example of genetic isolation leading to reduced biological fitness, Dr. Harmon explained. By the 3rd generation, marriages were exclusively between first or second cousins. By the 5th generation, Caleb and Iris's parents, the genetic diversity had become critically compromised. The twins' parents, Samuel and Ruth Blackwood, were themselves first cousins who had grown up in the same household. County death records showed that Samuel had passed away just months before the twins' discovery, apparently from heart failure at the unusually young age of 42. Ruth had died during childbirth years earlier, leaving their biological relationship to the twins unclear without modern testing methods. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel if you want to understand the darkest corners of American history that textbooks never dare to mention. These forgotten stories reveal more about human nature than comfortable narratives ever could. When social services finally intervened, they discovered that Caleb and Iris had been living alone for at least 6 months following their father's death. Their development had been severely stunted. Neither could read or write, and their speech was limited to a private language only they seemed to understand. Most troubling were the identical physical abnormalities they shared: shortened fingers, pronounced brow ridges, and intellectual development assessed at less than half their chronological age. These weren't just the results of isolation, noted Dr. James Williams, the physician who first examined them. These were textbook manifestations of generational consanguinity. The story of the Blackwood twins would soon capture the attention of medical researchers across the state, not merely for the physical manifestations of their heritage, but for what their case revealed about the consequences of extreme isolation in the modern era. As investigators would discover, the Blackwood property contained journals dating back 3 generations, documenting an increasingly paranoid worldview and disturbing family practices. The writings revealed how the family had systematically removed themselves from outside contact, rejecting modern medicine, formal education, and all governmental authority. But the most unsettling discoveries were yet to come. Hidden in the walls of the cabin, investigators found photographs spanning decades, showing the progressive physical changes across generations. Family members with increasingly pronounced abnormalities, smaller stature, and distinctive facial features that became more exaggerated with each generation. As night falls on our first chapter, we leave Caleb and Iris in the uncertain care of state authorities, who remain unaware of the true extent of the Blackwood family legacy and the dark secrets still hidden in the hollow that would emerge in the weeks to come. Dawn broke over McDowell County Hospital on October 10, 1978, where Caleb and Iris Blackwood underwent their first comprehensive medical evaluation. The clinical notes from that day would become foundational documents in understanding the profound consequences of their family's isolation. Patient exhibits multiple congenital anomalies consistent with homozygosity of deleterious recessive alleles, wrote Dr. Williams in his initial assessment. In simpler terms, the twins displayed physical and cognitive traits that only emerge when harmful genetic mutations are inherited from both parents, a hallmark of close biological relationships. The medical team was particularly concerned by the twins' cardiac evaluations. Both exhibited abnormal heart structures, with Caleb showing signs of an atrial septal defect, a hole between chambers of the heart that had gone untreated his entire life. Iris suffered from a heart murmur and arrhythmia that required immediate medication. What struck me wasn't just the severity of their conditions, but how identical their medical profiles were, Dr. Williams later told researchers. Their blood work, their developmental delays, even their dentition followed patterns so similar that it raised immediate questions about their parentage. While modern genetic testing wasn't available in 1978, blood typing and protein analysis provided compelling evidence. The twins shared rare blood markers that, according to the medical knowledge of the time, strongly suggested they were the product of a relationship far closer than cousins. Hospital records documented additional findings that painted a disturbing picture. Both twins had compromised immune systems, underdeveloped lungs, and vision problems. Their growth charts placed them in the lowest percentiles for height and weight, despite no evidence of malnutrition during early childhood. The most revealing discovery came when researchers from West Virginia University examined the family's medical artifacts. Among the items recovered from the Blackwood cabin were handwritten medical logs kept by Samuel Blackwood, detailing births, deaths, and illnesses across generations. These records revealed a pattern of increasing infant mortality and shortened lifespans coinciding with the family's isolation. In the early logs from the 1880s, we see relatively normal patterns of health, explained Dr. Margaret Collins, a medical historian who analyzed the documents. But by the 1920s, there are repeated mentions of weak children and familiar ailments, euphemisms for genetic disorders becoming more prevalent in the family line. The logs documented 8 stillbirths between 1930 and 1960, along with numerous children who didn't survive beyond age 5. Perhaps most telling was the notation beside Caleb and Iris's birth entry, survivors of 3. As medical professionals worked to address the twins' immediate health concerns, social workers faced the challenge of their profound developmental delays. Neither twin had received formal education, and their social development appeared frozen at roughly a 7-year-old level. They communicated primarily through gestures and a private language that linguists would later classify as an idioglossia, a phenomenon sometimes observed in isolated twins. They functioned as a single unit, noted psychologist Dr. Sarah Reynolds. When separated for examinations, both became extremely agitated. Caleb would rock continuously, while Iris would produce high-pitched vocalizations until they were reunited. The twins' case captured the attention of Dr. Robert Anderson, a geneticist from Johns Hopkins who traveled to West Virginia upon hearing of their discovery. While he couldn't conduct the DNA analysis that would become standard decades later, his expertise in hereditary conditions allowed him to document the likely effects of consanguinity across the Blackwood generations. What we're seeing in these twins is the culmination of a multi-generational genetic bottleneck, Dr. Anderson explained in his report. Each successive consanguineous union increased the likelihood of deleterious recessive genes being expressed. By the 5th generation, the genetic load had become catastrophic. Anderson's examination of family photographs and medical records led him to identify a progression of specific traits. The distinctive facial structure with prominent brow and recessed chin had become increasingly pronounced with each generation, as had the intellectual disabilities and cardiac abnormalities. The most disturbing evidence came from property records and historical accounts. The Blackwood land had originally encompassed over 200 acres in 1868, but had gradually been sold off over decades to sustain the family as they became increasingly unable to work the land effectively. By 1978, only 15 acres remained, most of it untended for years. Local historian Martin Edwards uncovered church records showing that the Blackwood family had been active in community life until approximately 1900, when they abruptly ceased all participation in local functions. This timing coincided with a series of articles in the county newspaper about modern ideas of heredity following the rediscovery of Mendel's work on genetics, suggesting a possible trigger for the family's retreat from society. We believe that Jeremiah Blackwood Jr., the second-generation patriarch, may have recognized the emerging signs of consanguinity in his children and grandchildren, Edwards theorized. Rather than address the issue, he chose isolation to hide the family's condition from outside judgment. As the second week of investigation concluded, authorities were still piecing together the family's recent history. The absence of any living adult Blackwood left crucial questions unanswered. How had the family sustained itself financially? Why had no one reported the twins' situation after their father's death? And most pressingly, who was actually responsible for bringing them into the world? The answers would prove more disturbing than anyone anticipated, revealing how a family's determination to remain separate from society had created the perfect conditions for tragedy to unfold generation after generation, culminating in Caleb and Iris, perhaps the last of their line. The social workers assigned to Caleb and Iris faced an unprecedented challenge, how to interview subjects who barely spoke and had no concept of the outside world. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a collection of worn journals discovered in a hidden compartment beneath the cabin floorboards during a secondary investigation of the property. If you're still watching this far, say I understand the shadows in the comments. Only those who truly grasp the depth of human tragedy will connect with these forgotten souls. The journals, spanning from 1915 to 1977, were written primarily by Esther Blackwood, the twins' grandmother, who had documented family life with disturbing clarity. Her earliest entries revealed a woman of reasonable education and awareness who had married into the Blackwood family as a distant cousin. The deterioration of her handwriting and lucidity over decades paralleled the family's descent into deeper isolation. "We must keep to ourselves now," she wrote in 1932. "The new government programs are asking too many questions. They want to take special children away for testing in institutions. They won't understand our ways." The special children referenced throughout her writings were clearly those exhibiting signs of genetic disorders. Esther documented primitive attempts to address these conditions, including herbal remedies and prayer rituals that had been passed down through generations. Most revealing were Esther's observations about what she called the family pattern, her term for the increasingly apparent genetic abnormalities. She noted how children from more distant family connections showed fewer signs of the pattern, while those from closer relations displayed more pronounced characteristics. "Samuel's boy from his first union shows the strongest signs yet," she wrote in 1950. "His eyes don't track right, and he hasn't spoken at age 4. Ruth's daughter from her cousin Willie seems brighter, though small for her years." These entries provided investigators with the first clear confirmation of what medical examinations had suggested. The family had engaged in progressively closer biological relationships over generations. By the 1960s, Esther's entries indicated that marriages were occurring exclusively within the immediate family unit. Linguist Dr. Eleanor Wright from Marshall University was brought in to work with the twins after traditional interview methods failed. She employed a technique called parallel play therapy, sitting with them silently while providing art materials. After weeks of patience, the twins began producing drawings that offered windows into their experiences. Their artwork showed consistent motifs, Dr. Wright reported. Repeated depictions of a woman with long hair watching from windows. Identical figures always drawn holding hands, and a larger male figure often placed in corners or doorways. The drawings aligned disturbingly with details from Esther's journals. Her later entries, growing increasingly disjointed, described how her son Samuel had taken control of the family after her husband's death in 1957. Under his leadership, the family's isolation became absolute. He removed the cabin's radio, their last connection to outside information, and established strict boundaries that family members were forbidden to cross. County records provided additional context for the family's retreat from society. In 1959, a public health initiative had attempted to conduct vaccinations in remote areas of McDowell County. When nurses approached the Blackwood property, they were met with armed resistance. Their report described seeing multiple children with visible developmental abnormalities before being forced to leave. This incident apparently cemented Samuel's paranoia about outside interference. Esther's journals documented how he began constructing underground root cellars in hidden rooms to conceal family members during rare visits from outsiders or government officials. The most disturbing entries appeared in the final journal dating to 1960 to 1961, where Esther described Samuel's decision regarding the family's future. Samuel says we've been weakened by bringing in even distant blood. He says the true Blackwood line must be preserved unspoiled. He's taken Ruth as his wife now, though she's barely 16. He says their children will restore the family's strength. Ruth, according to earlier entries, was Samuel's first cousin who had grown up in the household from infancy after her parents also. Blackwoods died from what Esther described as the family heart weakness. This relationship appeared to have produced at least 2 pregnancies before Caleb and Iris. Esther's fragmented notes mentioned a stillborn child in 1959 and another who survived only weeks in 1960, both exhibiting severe abnormalities. The twins, born in 1961 according to Esther's final entries, were remarkably healthy by comparison, though she noted they were small and quiet, too quiet from the beginning. The journals ended abruptly in late 1961, suggesting Esther may have passed away shortly after the twins' birth. When investigators used these journals to gently prompt the twins through visual aids, their reactions provided confirmation. Caleb became visibly distressed at photographs of Samuel, while Iris would only point to images of Ruth when shown family pictures, repeating a single word that sounded like gone. Local mining company records added another piece to the puzzle. Samuel Blackwood had maintained sporadic employment at the Keystone Mine until 1972, providing the family's only documented income. Co-workers described him as strange but functional, noting he never participated in social activities and always left promptly at shift's end. One former miner, Harold Jenkins, provided crucial testimony. Samuel would sometimes bring one of the children to the mine office to collect his pay, always the boy, never the girl. That boy wouldn't speak, wouldn't look at nobody. Just stood there like a statue while Samuel took the money. Last time I saw them would have been 75 or 76, before the mine scaled back operations. This timeline aligned with local store records showing cash purchases of basic supplies, flour, coffee, ammunition made by S. Blackwood until early 1978 when they abruptly ceased. Medical examiners now believe this coincided with Samuel's death from heart failure, leaving the 17-year-old twins to survive alone. For 6 months, Caleb and Iris had maintained their isolated existence without adult supervision. They had continued tending the family's small vegetable garden and collecting rainwater, living essentially as their family had taught them, invisible to the outside world, until chance brought the game warden to their door. As the investigation deepened, one question loomed largest. Were Caleb and Iris themselves siblings, or was their relationship even closer? The answer would emerge through an unexpected discovery in the final search of the property, a discovery that would reshape understanding of the entire case. On November 8, 1978, forensic investigators made a grim discovery while excavating a small family cemetery on the Blackwood property. Among the roughly marked graves dating back to the 1870s, they found 7 small burial sites with handmade wooden markers. These tiny graves, arranged in a semicircle at the edge of the plot, bore only dates, no names spanning from 1959 to 1974. These weren't standard burials, noted forensic anthropologist Dr. Victor Martinez, who supervised the excavation. These were more like bundles, carefully wrapped in quilt pieces. They contained the remains of infants, none of whom appeared to have survived more than a few days after birth. Laboratory analysis revealed that these infants had suffered from severe congenital abnormalities, including anencephaly, underdeveloped brain and skull, and other neural tube defects consistent with extreme consanguinity. The timing of these births suggested that Ruth Blackwood had endured multiple pregnancies beyond those documented in Esther's journals, with Caleb and Iris being her only surviving offspring. The most significant breakthrough in understanding the family dynamics came when investigators discovered a hidden compartment in the twins' shared bedroom. Behind a loose wallboard, they found Ruth Blackwood's personal effects, a simple wedding band, a hairbrush containing long dark strands, and most importantly, a series of letters written but apparently never sent. These letters, addressed simply to my sister, revealed that Ruth had maintained at least the fantasy of contact with an older sister who had left the family compound in the early 1950s. The contents painted a disturbing picture of life under Samuel's control and confirmed what medical evidence had suggested about the twins' parentage. "My dear sister," one letter from approximately 1965 began, "the children grow despite everything. They are 4 now and still so small, but they have each other. Samuel says they are perfect because they are pure Blackwood, through and through. He says they must stay together always, that their children will strengthen the line even more." I try to tell him they are too close, that even I know this is wrong, but he doesn't listen anymore. This letter provided the clearest evidence yet that Samuel had not only taken his first cousin Ruth as a cis wife, but had already planned for Caleb and Iris themselves, the product of this union, to continue the family line together. This revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation team and necessitated immediate reconsideration of the twins' care plan. "We weren't just dealing with victims of isolation and neglect," explained social worker Margaret Collins. "We were looking at children who had been deliberately conditioned from birth to view extreme consanguinity as their expected future." Psychological evaluations took on new urgency as experts attempted to determine how deeply this conditioning had affected the twins' development. Initial findings were concerning. The twins displayed no concept of appropriate biological boundaries and became severely distressed when separated from each other, even briefly. "They operated as a single social unit," noted psychologist Dr. Reynolds, "in 30 years of practice. I'd never encountered siblings with such profound attachment. They anticipated each other's needs without verbal communication and showed extreme anxiety when placed in separate rooms." Further complicating the situation was the twins' reaction to other people their age. When carefully introduced to other teenagers in a controlled therapeutic setting, both Caleb and Iris displayed obvious fear and confusion. They lacked even the most basic understanding of social interaction outside their two-person world. Educational testing revealed another dimension of their isolation. While severely delayed in academic skills, both twins demonstrated surprising abilities in specific areas. Caleb showed an intuitive understanding of mechanical systems and could repair simple tools without instruction. Iris displayed an exceptional memory for patterns and could reproduce complex designs after seeing them only briefly. These islands of ability suggested that their intellectual potential had been severely underutilized, explained educational psychologist Dr. Williams. Their development hadn't just been delayed, it had been channeled into an extremely narrow range of skills necessary for their isolated existence. The investigation took another turn when authorities finally located Mary Blackwood, the sister to whom Ruth had written her unsent letters. Now Mary Collins, aged 52. She had fled the family property in 1952 at age 16 and married a coal miner from a neighboring county. She had deliberately severed all contact with her family after what she described as years of witnessing things no child should see. Mary's testimony provided crucial historical context for the Blackwood family's decline. According to her account, her grandfather, Jeremiah Jr., had established the pattern of cousin marriages, but her father, Elijah, had taken this practice further by arranging marriages between siblings, including his own children. "My older sister Elizabeth was given to our brother Thomas when she turned 15, Mary testified. "When I realized I was next, I ran away in the night. I never knew what happened to Ruth. She was only 10 when I left. I tried to forget that place existed. When gently informed about Ruth's fate and the discovery of the twins, Mary broke down. I should have taken her with me," she repeated. "I knew what would happen, but I was so young and scared." Mary's testimony led investigators back to the Blackwood property for another thorough search. Using ground-penetrating radar, they discovered what appeared to be additional burial sites near the main family cemetery, older graves that had been deliberately obscured. With a court order, these sites were excavated, revealing the remains of at least 4 individuals buried between 1920 and 1940. Forensic analysis indicated these were young women, likely between 16 and 25 years old, all showing signs of having given birth shortly before death. The positioning of these graves outside the family plot without markers suggested these deaths may have been considered shameful in some way. "We believe these women may have been victims of forced consanguineous relationships who died in childbirth," Dr. Martinez theorized. The careful concealment of these graves suggests the family was aware, on some level, that their practices violated social norms, even as they continued them. The investigation had uncovered 5 generations of progressive genetic isolation, culminating in Caleb and Iris children who embodied the accumulated genetic burden of their ancestry. But the immediate concern remained their future care and whether rehabilitation into mainstream society was even possible after 17 years of such profound isolation and conditioning. As November turned to December, the court appointed Mary Collins as the twins' legal guardian, hoping that this biological connection might ease their transition. What followed would test the limits of therapeutic intervention and reveal whether the damage inflicted by generations of isolation could ever truly be undone. The winter of 1978-1979 marked the beginning of what doctors would call the most ambitious rehabilitation case in West Virginia's history. Caleb and Iris Blackwood, now in the legal custody of their Aunt Mary Collins, faced the overwhelming task of integrating into a world they had been taught to fear. The transition began in a specially prepared wing of the McDowell County Hospital, where medical staff worked to address the twins' immediate health concerns while a team of specialists developed a comprehensive rehabilitation plan. Their cardiac conditions required ongoing medication, their dental health demanded extensive intervention, and their nutritional deficiencies necessitated carefully monitored dietary supplements. We essentially had to rebuild their physical health from the ground up, explained Dr. Williams. Years of isolation and inadequate medical care had left them with conditions that would typically have been addressed in early childhood. Mary Collins visited daily, bringing photographs of her own family and simple objects from the outside world. Her patient presence provided a crucial bridge between the twins' isolated past and their uncertain future. Though initially unresponsive to her, by January 1979, both Caleb and Iris had begun acknowledging her presence with brief eye contact, a significant breakthrough. The most challenging aspect of their rehabilitation proved to be separating the twins from each other. Their profound codependency had been deliberately fostered throughout their lives, creating what psychologists termed a pathological attachment that needed careful, gradual intervention. "We couldn't simply separate them, Doctor," Reynolds explained. "Their entire sense of security and identity was built around their togetherness. Abrupt separation would have been psychologically devastating. Instead, therapists implemented a program of progressive differentiation, beginning with activities where the twins could see each other while engaging separately with different therapists. Even this minimal separation initially triggered extreme distress, with both twins exhibiting signs of panic until visual contact was reestablished. By March 1979, a milestone was reached when Caleb and Iris were able to remain in adjacent rooms with the door open for 30 minutes. Their first significant physical separation since being taken into care. The medical team documented this as a critical step toward establishing individual identities. Language acquisition became another priority. While the twins understood basic English, their expressive language was severely limited and interspersed with words from their private idioglossia. Speech therapists worked intensively to expand their vocabulary and communication skills, focusing particularly on helping them express basic needs and emotions. Iris showed more natural aptitude for language, noted speech therapist Janet Wilson. By April, she was using 2-3 word phrases consistently. Caleb remained more hesitant but began using single words appropriately, particularly when requesting to see his sister. Educational interventions revealed both the depths of their academic deficits and glimpses of potential. Neither twin could read or perform basic arithmetic initially, but both showed surprising aptitude for visual learning. Using picture-based teaching methods, educators began introducing fundamental concepts, celebrating small victories like Iris identifying written numbers or Caleb matching simple words to objects. The most poignant moment in their early rehabilitation came on April 15, 1979. When Mary Collins brought photographs of Ruth Blackwood she had located among old family possessions. The twins' reaction, touching the images gently and producing a keening sound that staff had never heard before, confirmed that despite their upbringing, they had formed a genuine attachment to their mother. This emotional breakthrough led to a new therapeutic approach, incorporating elements of their past rather than attempting to erase it entirely. Mary provided simple objects from Appalachian tradition, handmade quilts, wooden utensils, and mountain ballads on cassette tapes that seemed to comfort the twins during periods of distress. "We realized we couldn't simply replace their history," Dr. Reynolds reflected. Recovery meant helping them integrate their past with their present in a healthier way. By summer 1979, medical professionals deemed the twins stable enough to transition to Mary's home in neighboring Wyoming County. A specially designed addition to her modest house provided separate but adjacent bedrooms for Caleb and Iris, along with a common area where therapy could continue under professional supervision. The twins' first night away from institutional care marked both progress and the challenges ahead. While they initially refused to sleep in separate rooms, by morning they had each retreated to their own spaces, a small but significant step toward individuation. The case had by now attracted attention from medical researchers nationwide. The New England Journal of Medicine published a preliminary paper on the twins in September 1979, using their case to illustrate the profound developmental impacts of extreme genetic isolation combined with social deprivation. The Blackwood twins represent a unique opportunity to understand the interplay between genetic inheritance and environmental influences, wrote Dr. Anderson. Their rehabilitation challenges us to distinguish which aspects of their condition might respond to intervention and which may be permanent consequences of their genetic heritage. The paper carefully anonymized the case, using pseudonyms and altered locations to protect the twins' privacy while still sharing the valuable medical insights their situation provided. Ethical considerations remained paramount as the team balanced the scientific significance of the case against the twins' right to dignity and confidentiality. By the one-year anniversary of their discovery, progress reports painted a cautiously optimistic picture. Both twins had achieved basic literacy at approximately a third-grade level. Iris had developed a vocabulary of several hundred words and could construct simple sentences, while Caleb communicated more through writing than speech, showing particular interest in drawing mechanical objects. Most significantly, they had begun forming relationships with people beyond each other. Mary's husband Thomas had become a steadying presence, particularly for Caleb, who would follow him around the property watching his carpentry work with evident fascination. Mary's daughter Elizabeth, though initially viewed with suspicion by the twins, had gradually been accepted as a presence in their daily lives. They were learning, slowly but surely, that connection with others wasn't inherently threatening, Mary noted in her journal. They were discovering family as it should have been all along. The final pages of the Blackwood case would be written not in medical journals, but in the quiet achievements of daily life. By 1985, both twins had attained functional independence in basic self-care and household tasks. While neither would ever live completely independently or achieve typical adult social functioning, they had far exceeded the initial grim prognoses. Caleb found purpose in woodworking, creating simple furniture pieces under his uncle's guidance. His creations, marked by meticulous attention to detail, eventually gained local recognition and provided him a sense of contribution and value. Though he never became verbally fluent, his written communications grew increasingly complex over time. Iris developed a particular connection with her aunt's garden, displaying an intuitive understanding of plant care that Mary described as almost uncanny. Her language skills continued to improve, and by her mid-20s, she could engage in simple conversations, particularly about topics that interested her. Her developmental level stabilized at approximately that of a 10-year-old child, limited but sufficient for meaningful participation in family life. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of their recovery was the gradual establishment of healthy boundaries between them. While they maintained a close bond, it evolved from pathological dependence to something resembling a typical sibling relationship. They developed different interests, formed individual attachments to other family members, and eventually could spend entire days engaged in separate activities. What the Blackwood case ultimately taught us, Dr. Reynolds reflected in a follow-up study published in 1990, was the remarkable resilience of the human spirit. Despite generations of isolation and conditions that should have rendered normal development impossible, Caleb and Iris found their way to a life of dignity and connection. The hidden cemetery on the Blackwood property was eventually designated a protected historical site, with appropriate markers placed to honor the unnamed victims of the family's tragic history. Mary Collins established a small foundation dedicated to supporting rural health initiatives in McDowell County, ensuring that no other family could disappear so completely from community awareness again. The cabin itself was demolished in 1982, the land reclaimed by forest. Nothing remains today to indicate the generations of suffering that unfolded in that remote, hollow nothing except the medical literature that continues to cite the Blackwood case as a landmark study in genetic isolation and the profound consequences of extreme consanguinity. If you've watched this entire story, you've witnessed one of America's most haunting chapters of isolation and genetic tragedy. Subscribe to our channel to uncover more hidden histories that shape our understanding of human nature. Leave a comment saying, "I watched it all," so I can know who truly appreciates these deep dives into forgotten lives. Like and share this video to help others understand these important historical lessons that must never be forgotten. The story of Caleb and Iris Blackwood reminds us that even in modern America, darkness can thrive in isolated corners and that sometimes the most profound human truths emerge from the most painful human experiences.